In this lecture, I'm going to be looking at the figure of the doctor within the Muslim tradition. We're going to start out very early on in the tradition, moving us into the contemporary period. The principles remain largely the same as you're going to see. So this image that I'm offering here is from a fairly recent book that I was very excited to find because it's one of the few on the topic, as I said, in English. So it's called Islam and Healing, Loss and Recovery of an Indo-Muslim Medical Tradition, 1600 to 1900. And it's written by Sima Alavi. And so her family was actually, they were practitioners of this healing system that developed taking Muslim principles, but developing them slightly differently within the Indian South Asian setting. And as I'm going to say at the end, this continues into the present day. It's a fully functioning system within India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And so we're slowly starting to get texts on the topic. And in this case, we have a kind of an insider's view. I want to start off here by talking about a larger concept in order to understand how healing, health healing develops within the Muslim tradition. So this is a diagram of Dar al-Islam, so rendered into English as the Muslim world. And so this is a very important concept in order to understand how this functions, because this isn't based on nation states, which is how we tend to think of things now. And this would have been true too for the Christian world. It was called Christendom. It had to do with what countries were Christian. It had nothing to do with nation states. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. So what we see here is that Islam moves out of Saudi Arabia very, very quickly and converts people all across the zone, spreading all the way from northern Africa into India. There are Muslim communities in China as well. And so this is one of the nobody really knows why. There's a number of theories for why this was so successful. One of the theories is there was a power vacuum in the region at the time. The various empires that had been controlling these regions had kind of lost power. The other reason is the message of Islam was extremely appealing to people. Its message of charity, its message of the equality of all Muslims. And so there's obviously, as with all religions, there's a variety of reasons why it's appealing to people. But what we see is the development of a whole Muslim culture, okay? And that includes architecture, art, and healing systems. And so these spread all through the Muslim world. And as a result of this, there were networks of doctors that would be moving throughout the Dar al-Islam. And so they wouldn't necessarily live in one specific country. They would move to all these various areas. So I'll be talking about some of them in the following slides. I want to look now at Al-Razi or Rhazes, how it's rendered in Latin. So what we see with these doctors is that they are also recognized within the Latin tradition as being great physicians. And so I just want to talk about what we know about him. He's a kind of paradigm of the doctor within the Muslim tradition. And so he was born in what is now Iran, we think around 854 CE. And he is known as being an alchemist, a physician, and a philosopher. So this is a very important point. We see it again and again. Actually across tradition. We saw it in the Chinese tradition. We see it in many of the world's traditions, that the doctor is also a philosopher. So somebody who's a sort of all-around humanitarian, intelligent person. This is the ideal. And so we're told that he served as chief physician at the hospital in the town of Ray, and then he held a similar position in Baghdad. So we see that he followed the pattern of many intellectuals of his time, that he served in various small courts in that Dar al-Islam, that Muslim world. So he was very connected, as were many of the physicians in the Islamic world, to the ancient Greek tradition, and they're very explicit about this connection. And many of the Muslim doctors were involved in translating the works of Hippocrates, for instance. And so we're told that Al-Razi viewed himself as the Islamic version of Socrates in philosophy and of Hippocrates in medicine. So he himself was very explicit about that connection between philosophy and medicine in his own life. And so I think it's interesting to see the way he's rendered here if we look at it. So he's treating a child, and so we can see by his body language this kind of nurturing care that he's giving to this child. And so even within the images of the ideal doctor, and we talked about the ideal doctor in the ancient Greek tradition, the ideal doctor in various traditions across the world. And so here we have, it's very similar. I mean, we're seeing all the same characteristics that we expect in a doctor, somebody who's compassionate, somebody who's hands-on caring for others when they're ill. And so Al-Razi continues to stand as sort of this ideal paradigm of the good doctor within the Muslim world. The topic of the creation of early hospitals is, I think, certainly within the Western world, this has been completely lost, that some of the earliest hospitals were created within the Muslim world, and they go back right to the 9th century. And so I think this is very important to recover this knowledge. And so it derives directly from Islamic political and religious views. I'm going to be attaching an article I came across to Blackboard, and it also gives, I couldn't get it onto a slide for some reason, but it's a layout of the hospital and the way it's where the patients are kept, etc. And so you can get a sense of what it looked like on the inside. This is the exterior of a hospital in Egypt from the 1284, we think around 1284 it was founded. And so you can see, as I said, the way the beauty of the architecture. This is very typical Islamic style of architecture. And so the idea of the hospital also being beautiful, just the way a mosque would be beautiful. And so we see that from the very earliest time after Muhammad, when the power within the Sunni community goes to the caliphs, that they were very interested in medicine and also founding hospitals. So we hear that because this is a direct expression of care of the whole, the ummah, the whole idea that the body is one, the body of Islam is one. And so Islamic rulers founded libraries in cities like Cairo, Aleppo, in Central Asia, and what is now Spain. And as we saw in the Egyptian, Greek, Persian, Roman, and South Asian case, and in the Buddhist world, these libraries become repositories of knowledge of medicine, and so they don't get lost over time. And so we find that the caliphs were very interested in translating medical works from Greek, Indian, and Persian works into Arabic, and so as a result, and Latin, and as a result, they became often the ones who maintained the corpus more than within the Christian world. So oftentimes we had to go back to Arabic translations of these works of people like Hippocrates. And so you can see, and I find this so interesting in the world we live in because it's so kind of racially and politically split and religiously split, that there was no sense of these were from different religions or different ethnic groups. It was like, this is medical knowledge. We're going to just keep it in the library and translate it. And so, which is also the tradition of the universities that exist in the Western world. And I hope I know it's under attack in the United States right now, but that is the ideal of the university, that it's about knowledge. It's not about where the knowledge came from. And we have seen throughout this course that when it comes to healing, healers aren't fussy about where things come from as long as they work to help people. So we see that these leaders were interested in medicine, and so they began to endow hospitals. And so probably the first one in the Islamic world was in Damascus and Baghdad in the early 10th century. And they sponsored a variety of healing institutions. And I discussed this on page 127 of your textbook. So the hospitals often included a wing for the mentally ill, they often featured a mosque for Muslims and a chapel for Christians. So we can see again that idea that Christians were seen as people of the book, and so they would be also cared for. So the expressed intent was, quote, to serve all men and women, rich or poor, who lived in Cairo and in its surrounding areas. Okay. So the idea of the hospital being for all. The next figure I want to look at is Ibn Sina, or Avicenna in Latin. And so he is considered the preeminent Muslim physician of the medieval world and was widely respected in Jewish and Christian circles as well. And so it's interesting to me, there's a whole kind of description of him in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So he's also considered a philosopher, but partly just because of the way we fragment things. I think the religious angle gets lost because we're also told that he memorized the entire Quran at an early age, and that he was learned in mathematics, geometry, astronomy, physics, metaphysics, music, and poetry. So this kind of polymath, what we would call the Renaissance man, this idea that he knew all of these things, not just medicine. He's also famous because he was a prolific writer, and so he was very committed to writing down what he had learned for others to have, just as Hippocrates was. And so he's noted for his contributions in the fields of Aristotelian philosophy and medicine, and he composed the book, the Kitab al-Shifa, Book of the Cure. So I'll be talking about that, his writing on the next slide. The Kitabi al-Shifa is considered to be one of the most important books in the history of medicine, in sort of world medicine. And so this is considered his kind of culminating work and covers a huge amount of information. So he looks at geometry, science. So Ibn Sina is also considered to be a scientist from the point of view of contemporary Western society. It wasn't divided up like that at this time, as I've been saying. It wasn't divided up like this in the medieval world of Christianity or Judaism either. So we saw that with Maimonides, that idea that somebody could be doing all of these things, that wasn't considered to be strange at that time. And so this is a kind of encyclopedic work that would have been important for everyone who came after him. And this one, I'm happy to say, is fairly easy to find in translation because it's such an important work in world medicine. And so we also find within this work what we would refer to now as psychology. So he has a discussion of melancholia, what we would now call depression, as a kind of mood disorder. And so as we saw within the hospitals of Islam, there were wings for mental disorders, people who were suffering under mental disorders. So this was a recognized kind of part of medicine going right back to the earliest forms of the hospital. And so again, as with Al-Razi, Ibn Sina is considered to be a model, continues to be a paradigmatic model of the kind of polymath, the intelligence, the intellect, the openness, the clear thinking, and the compassion of a good doctor. As I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, we see these medical traditions and medical doctors moving around that Dar al-Islam. So in the case of South Asia, Islam was never the majority tradition, that was Hinduism, but nonetheless, because there were Muslim political rulers for hundreds of years, we see these systems moving into India and becoming very influential and continue to be into the present. So the Unani system developed from within the Greco-Arabic work of Ibn Sina, Hippocrates, and Galen. Okay, so again, that idea of the Muslim world taking up the work of the ancient Greeks and developing it further, or working with it. And so by the 13th century CE, Unani medicine was spread throughout the Muslim world. And when it got into India, it began to develop in its own way, still using these basic Islamic principles, but also interacting with other systems such as Ayurveda. So in the Indian case, you see this kind of crossing over between the two sometimes. So as was the case in the entire Muslim world, political leaders like the Mughal emperors supported the writing of medical texts at their courts and wanted to attract physicians to their courts. It was kind of a feather in their cap if they were able to attract these brilliant scholars and physicians to their courts. So we start to see this figure of the Muslim Hakim or doctor, similar to the Hindu, which is called a Vaid. And so again, they were often working together, as I had said earlier, that these typical divisions that keep religion separate just very rarely apply to doctors and medical researchers, as for reasons I discussed already. And so we start to see in tandem, the Hakims and the Vaids start creating a pharmacopoeia, so a kind of a pharmaceutical knowledge of plants and medicinal plants in that area of South Asia, and those are still extant. And we also see them both working in hospitals. So patronage of medicine was a central form of Mughal governance. So that was nothing new. We saw that with the earliest leaders of the Muslim community, that they were expected to look out for public welfare. And so founding and maintaining hospitals was part of that. So the first Hakims wrote in Persian, and so were part of a larger Persian understanding. So the Hakim, or the doctor, was meant to be somebody who was a kind of all-round intellectual person, a philosopher, as well as a doctor, and part of a kind of sophisticated cosmopolitan culture. So a lot of the documents that we read about the Hakim contain material that might seem a little bit strange, perhaps from a Western scientific point of view, that talks about the importance of things like etiquette and proper comportment for a doctor, but really it isn't that different than the Hippocratic Oath and the idea that, and I think this hasn't changed, that we expect our doctor to look and act a certain way. I think that still remains. And so with the decline of Mughal power in India, with the British coming in, the British Empire moving into that vacuum, the Hakims and the Unani system loses that kind of support. However, the British colonial power did hire, because there were never very many British people in India, so the colonial power hired both Muslim and Hindu doctors to work as public servants. So they were able to kind of maintain their systems, both the Ayurvedic doctors and the Unani doctors. And this resulted in a kind of hybrid system that still exists in India today, where there are biomedical hospitals, Ayurvedic hospitals, and then Unani. So this maintains itself. So just to give an example that is talked about in Islam and Healing, that image I offered at the very beginning, Seema Alavi talks about the way the colonial powers used the Hakims and the Ayurvedic physicians to, for instance, participate in vaccination campaigns, because they were obviously skilled physicians. So it's interesting to see, moving us into the contemporary period, that the Indian government established official recognition of Unani medicine. So the Indian Medicine Central Council in 1970 now regulates education and practice of the system, and it continues within, as I said earlier, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. So I personally don't know of Unani doctors in Canada. I suspect there are some. I'm going to have to have a look, but the system continues to be very important in the South Asian context. In the first lecture, I talked about Sufism as that third division within the Muslim tradition, although we have to be careful, it's not separate, it's woven throughout the tradition. And so this, as I said, is the mystical branch, and so it retains a very close relationship with healing. And so what we see is Sufi peers or saints are often associated with healing miracles. And so the places where they're buried often become pilgrimage sites where you would go. And so a very famous one is Nizamuddin Aulia Dargah in New Delhi. And so it's right in the heart of the city. It's been referred to as the heart of Delhi. It's a very, very popular pilgrimage site, not just for Muslims, but of any people of any background. And so people with the usual problems and issues. It could be infertility, it could be problems with money, it could be health problems. We'll go to these sites and say prayers and tie thread on the tomb of the saint. And so these pirs were associated with healing miracles, and so there is a direct connection. The Sufis often look back to Jesus as a healer. They don't see him as a Messiah, but they see him as a prophet and a healer. And they also look, of course, to the Prophet Muhammad for miraculous healing. And so many of these saints, as is the case with many holy people across tradition, were associated with miraculous healing. So this continues to be the case across the Muslim world. Now, in some cases, because of fundamentalist movements within Islam, some of these Sufi sites have been under direct attack, but nonetheless, this remains a very important aspect of ideas around healing within the Muslim tradition. So I came across this book, In Alma's Healing Room, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it because this is a case where it's a woman healer. And so she is a very typical type of Sufi inflected healer. And so she's referred to as Amma, which is also what a Hindu guru, female guru, would be referred to. Amma means mother. And so many of her practices look very similar, unsurprisingly, to what we would see from the Hindu tradition. The difference being that we see much more where there's work with the written words, which shouldn't be surprising given what we know about Islam. And so these types of healing also have to do with things like what's referred to as Nazar, the evil eye. So amulets, protective amulets, and so on, she would make, but she would also send people to herbalists and give advice around what herbs the person needs to be taking. I think it is interesting, as they note in the book, that she's very clear about the limitations of her healing, and that if somebody needs physical treatment, they need to go to a medical doctor. I also came across this idea of the Nasma, which is the idea of the non-physical body. And I hadn't seen this before in the Islamic tradition, and we're going to be talking about the energy body when we get to the metaphysical traditions, and we already saw it within Hinduism, that idea of the koshas. And so within Sufism, it has a similar idea of the energies of the body that need to be balanced. So it's not just about the physical body. And so one of the key ways to maintain this subtle body is, unsurprisingly, through being a proper Muslim and through prayer. I wanted to finish this lecture by looking at a contemporary Muslim doctor, and I wanted to look at somebody from the North Bay community and somebody I have met. And so Dr. Inez Jinnah is well known within the North Bay community, and I'm going to be attaching, she won an award of excellence, and I'm going to be attaching that to Blackboard from the board of the Regional Health Center in North Bay. And so she very kindly agreed to be interviewed by me, and she was extremely open about how her faith influenced her role as a doctor. She works both at the hospital and at the hospice. She's, at least last time I was involved, she was the consulting physician at the hospice. So she's very concerned with that part of healthcare. So the interview is very edited down, but on page 32 of your textbook. And so I asked her what she felt to be the connection between religious faith and her practice as a physician, and she says, as a Muslim, I am comforted by knowing that God's will decides everything. Things happen, and they happen for a reason. We are asked by God to always show mercy and to alleviate suffering wherever possible. Okay, so here we have, again, unsurprisingly, that idea of mercy and compassion, and that's absolutely central. That's a characteristic of God, and one that all Muslims are trying to imitate or live in their own lives. And so the doctor is particularly tasked with bringing this into the world to show mercy, to alleviate suffering. So she goes on to say, Muslims believe in the afterlife and that this life is one part of a much longer story. So I was asking her about how her religious faith impacted her as a physician. And so I've come across this with other physicians and nurses as well. This idea that obviously this is a very challenging vocation. And so having a religious faith that things happen for a reason, even though they seem to be extremely tragic and are tragic a lot of the time, that they happen for a reason, that this is decided by God. This I think is very sort of grounding for the healthcare worker. So she says, it is my role to offer assistance and to help my patients navigate and to be a reliable source of assistance. So you're going to see when they interview people about her, this idea that she's always available. People can call her at any time of day and night. So we really see, as we saw with Dr. Oliveri, this idea that these kind of careers in nursing and medicine and healthcare are not 9-to-5 jobs. They're not just jobs. They're calling. And so this idea that she makes herself available to people. She's very clear, and I thought this was really, her humility is very central when she's speaking, but she said, I know secular people who volunteer and are just as caring. So she's not saying just Muslims have this. I thought that was really important. So she gives the example of someone she knows who's not religious at all, but who volunteers all the time. So I asked her how she became interested in palliative care, and she said it was through mentorship by Dr. Brian Shaw. He taught me how to talk to patients the right approach. And then I was asked to join a palliative care committee. So she became interested through the mentoring of another physician, and as I said, she's been active within palliative care in North Bay ever since. So certainly within Nipissing Serenity Hospice, which I'll be talking about in more detail towards the end of the course, she's been a very important ambassador, and I'm going to be talking about some of the controversies that came around MAID versus hospice when the hospice first opened, and Dr. Jinnah was one of the key people that was kind of explaining what palliative care was to other doctors. So I talk about the controversy around palliative care and the idea of what should you tell a patient about their condition. So she said, I find this is very cultural. I had a case in the ICU where the daughter-in-law did not want to tell the patient. Okay, and so this was very interesting to me. So the idea that each culture also has its, which makes sense, has its own idea of should you tell somebody they're terminally ill? Because certainly within the secular system, the wisdom is that you should tell them, and they have the right to know. So she talks here about the spikes, the protocol of how you break bad news to the patient. So you can see that Dr. Jinnah is walking this line between kind of secular medicine and Muslim belief, but she doesn't see it as a tension. I was very struck by her saying there's nothing that contradicts. They both work hand in hand. So I asked if there was a Muslim idea of a good death, and she said not specifically, because the time of death is part of the will of God. So I thought that was interesting too, that it's not so much when and where you die or how it happens, but as long as you're following your faith, it's going to be a good death. And so she said there's a general idea that the person should be at peace with themselves, comfortable, and surrounded by family. So that's the ideal. But the central idea is that if you are at peace with life and what you have done, it doesn't really matter where you are. So as I said, I'm going to be attaching the short video that was made as a result of her winning an award of excellence, and you can hear what other healthcare workers have to say about Dr. Jinnah. But it is very clear that her Muslim faith has a deep influence on her practice of medicine.